Chapter 91. The disciples of Mount Hua, who were exhausted and on the verge of collapse from running, came to a hurried stop. Unfortunately for them, they happened to stop right as the Chung Sect arrived at the same location. Standing next to the third-class disciples, who were gasping and panting for air, Chung Myung awkwardly tilted his head and looked at Sama Seung. Me? A face that didn't seem to understand anything. Seeing the child's attempt to act innocent, Sama Seung asked again. I asked you, what did you say? Oh, that. Instead of answering, Chung Myung kicked the already staggering Jogul's shin. Fuck you. Do you have a death wish? Can't you run straight? I am your Sayong, you jerk. I forgot for a second there. Chung Myung scratched his head and grinned as he looked at Sama Seung. That must be what you heard. It's so embarrassing. Sama Seung glared at Chung Myung with venom dripping from his gaze. Sama Seung was not stupid enough to misunderstand who those words were directed at. There was no way he would be deceived by a child and his antics. At that moment, someone gently tugged on Sama Seung's sleeve. At this, he stopped himself from speaking and glanced back. It was Jin Gum-ryung. Elder, nothing good can come from arguing with a child. Sama Seung sighed and nodded. No matter how angry he was an elder of the Chung Sect. The difference in status was too great for him to speak to a child. If rumors spread that a third-class disciple from Mount Hua and an elder from the Chung Sect engaged in an argument, it would disgrace his name. Jin Gum-ryung stepped forward. Who is this young disciple? Who am I? Would you even know if I told you? Jin Gum-ryung looked at Chung Myung with blank eyes. He had never before met anyone who answered him with a question like this. Feeling beyond upset, he calmed himself and smiled. Perhaps I might know you, so why don't you tell me? Well, it isn't difficult. I am Chung Myung. Chung Myung. Jin Gum-ryung's smiling face immediately went stiff. It was a familiar name. Wasn't Chung Myung the name of the Mount Hua disciple that humiliated the Chung Sect? Jin Gum-ryung narrowed his eyes and looked at Chung Myung. He's younger than I thought. He thought it was absurd. Thanks to Chung Myung curing Master Huang, the Eunha Guild severed their relationships with the Chung Sect and began supporting Mount Hua. It was such an embarrassment that the Chung Sect refused to discuss the matter, even more so because Mount Hua was at its center. Thanks to that, the elders and the sect leader were furious. But the one that caused such shame to fall upon the sect was this young child. I see, disciple Chung Myung. But it seems like the disciple Chung Myung never learned proper manners. Although it was an outright rebuke at his attitude, Chung Myung picked his ears and whistled. I'm sorry, but I can't hear you very well. Could you come closer and speak up a bit? What did you say? Are you deaf? Come closer and talk to me. Can't you hear? Jin Gum-ryung's face hardened. Just where the hell does this kid's arrogance come from? If what Lee Song-baek said was true, this child was knocked back after one strike. This child had little training in martial arts. What did he believe in that gave him the confidence to speak such nonsense? Unless he was someone with no sense. It made Jin Gum-ryung want to pull out his sword and cut down the arrogant child right in front of him. However, this was Mount Hua and not the Chung Sect. He couldn't act carelessly here. This wasn't Jin Gum-ryung's role to play. Gnashing his teeth, he tried to speak softly. Aren't you a third-class disciple of Mount Hua? That's right. Mount Hua and the Chung Sect have shared wealth and woe in the past. Since that's the case, and since I am the senior, shouldn't you be the one to come closer to speak? Of course, as long as you have the slightest sense of manners. Ah, really? Chung Myung chuckled. Then why didn't you say that to your elder earlier? If you think that it's more polite for me to come closer to Sasuk, then shouldn't the elder of the Chung Sect be the one going to visit our sect leader? Shit. Aghast, Jin Gum-ryung hastily fell silent. He was trying to scold Chung Myung, but this child, used it as an opening to point out Sama Seung's rudeness. I ended up making a mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake. This small child led the flow of the conversation like that, letting Chung Myung stumble onto his mistake and admit his elder's fault. At that moment, Sama Seung, who was watching the situation, opened his mouth. This young man's mouth doesn't seem ordinary. Elder, move. Chung Myung, who bit his lip, stared at Chung Myung and then moved back without another word. Sama Seung smiled. Since your actions came from your pure-hearted desire to protect your sect leader's dignity, I won't hold you accountable this time. Yes, thank you. But you had best remember one thing. Your rudeness and mine aren't the same. Do you know why? I wonder. Because of power. Sama Seung spoke in a low voice. It is only when one's actions are pointed out that impoliteness is considered rude. If no one is willing to point it out, it is simply a passing remark. The right to point out such impoliteness comes from power. Your actions are rude because of your weakness, but my impoliteness cannot be considered rude because of my power. Chung Myung frowned. I think you should learn to speak more kindly before worrying about being polite. Seems that you're just a crazy one. Sama Seung turned away from Chung Myung and looked at Hyun-sang. I apologize for the disrespect earlier. Ah, no, elder. Why are you like this? Now that the child pointed out what I did, wasn't I being rude? I need to apologize. Hyun-sang wasn't sure what to do. It was a strange situation where the person who committed the mistake apologized, yet the person receiving the apology was the one that felt more uncomfortable. Sama Seung smiled and looked back at Chung Myung before speaking. Courage is easy to forgive when you're young. However, one day your actions may cause you to lose your head. Remember my words. With that, Sama Seung turned around. Let's go. Yes, elder. Guided by Hyun-sang, he led the disciples and began walking again. Meanwhile, Lee Song-baek bowed his head to Chung Myung. When Chung Myung returned his greeting with a slight nod, he smiled faintly and walked ahead. As the Jongnam sect disciples moved away, Jogul spoke with a pale face. Have you lost it? What the hell are you trying to do? What? That person is an elder of the Jongnam sect. Jongnam! Elder! Jongnam sect! Yeah. Chung Myung kicked Jogul in the shin again. He struck the same place as before, and Jogul agonizingly clutched his leg as he rolled along the floor. Ugh! Are you a disciple of Mount Hua? Didn't you hear the bullshit he was spouting towards the sect leader? You think we should hold back? Do you think we're enduring because we want to? Yun-jong stepped forward with a stiff face. Of course we're angry, but his words are right. A man without power has no right to point out flaws of someone who does have strength. Who said we lack power? Huh? Chung Myung turned his head and looked at the disciples of the Jongnam sect, who were walking away. Those bastards, how dare they? It was annoying that those thieves were brazen enough to walk into Mount Hua on their own feet, but they even dared to insult the sect leader. Even though Chung Myung believes that the current sect leader of Mount Hua lacks the qualifications of a real sect leader, Hyun-jong is still Mount Hua's representative, so Chung Myung must protect his dignity from others. For those idiots to insult the sect leader of Mount Hua, Chung Myung's eyes began to blaze in a fury. I tried to be good to them, but those bastards, even in a new life, wants to start fights with me. No, let's calm down. Chung Myung, please, I beg of you. Let's think first and then act, huh? The third-class disciples panicked when they saw the look in Chung Myung's eyes. They all knew they would be unable to do anything if Chung Myung got angry. At that moment, Chung Myung shook his head. Did all the Sahyongs get a good look? What? What those bastards are doing, even if they ignored Mount Hua, there is a limit to it. Are Sahyongs going to endure everything they say? No, we don't want to tolerate it either. But how do you... Listen well, Sahyongs. Chung Myung spoke with eyes that didn't stop blazing. If you lose to those bastards, you will lose everything. The faces of Yunjong and all the third-class disciples went pale. Chung Myung's eyes were spitting flames. You can lose to anyone else. It doesn't matter where you go or who beats you up. Only those Jongnam Sect bastards. They're the only ones that you can never lose to, even if you have to die. Anyone who makes me see such a shameful sight had better be prepared. There will come a day where the one who makes others shed tears of blood will shed tears of blood themselves. What you're saying doesn't fit the situation, you brat. It is the other way around for us. You're the one making us cry bloody tears. Why aren't you answering? Chung Myung asked with eyes sparkling in madness. Just the sight made a chill run down their spine. No, we want to do that too, but we... What? We what? Chung Myung approached the third-class disciples with a frightful glare. Are you not confident that you can win? Rather than that, then are you confident enough to die? Let me see a single loss, just one. That's fine, right? Let's all die together. You die and I die too. The Mount Hua and Jongnam Sect Conference, an event that was held to deepen the friendship between Mount Hua and Jongnam. However, now it seems like blood will be spilled because of one person's anger. That little boy. Jong So-han glanced back. Jin Gum-ryung approached him and quietly asked, Are you concerned about him? Jong So-han whispered, making sure that no one else heard him. Rather than being concerned, it feels ridiculous. I don't know where such a kid came from. Leave it alone. Jin Gum-ryung spoke in a stiff voice. It is the privilege of the weak to go wild and crazy without knowing the truth. Only a fool who doesn't know how high the sky is would act so recklessly. That is true, but I have no remorse. He acted arrogantly on his own will. Since we've come here for the conference, there will be plenty of opportunities for us to punish him in the future. I'd love to see if he can still talk like that once I tear off his mouth. Jin Gum-ryung smiled brightly. That isn't something a virtuous disciple should say. He was the one who started this fight. True. To be precise, the Jongnam Sect started this fight. But Jin Gum-ryung didn't bother pointing that out. Don't worry about useless things. Sa-ma-seung, who was ahead, spoke in a low voice at that time. In the end, a warrior will always speak with his sword. No matter how sharp his tongue may be, nothing will change. Yes, Elder. Strength isn't everything, but this is a place where nothing can be done without power. You all shouldn't forget that fact. I'll keep that in mind. Sa-ma-seung narrowed his eyes. This time, the conference will be interesting. Seeing them behave so arrogantly, they must have something to believe in. We must be sure to thoroughly trample their beliefs and squash their hope. Do you understand? Yes, Elder. Sa-ma-seung nodded his head with a smile. A very interesting one. Still, it was somewhat commendable. Even the elders of Mount Hua were fearful about speaking against the Jongnam Sect. But that young man stepped forward fearlessly. Sa-ma-seung stopped and looked back. The disciples who were following him were startled and halted in place. Elder, what's wrong? Sa-ma-seung, who was staring back with a fear-inducing gaze, soon calmed his expression. No, nothing. It was nothing. The elder then turned around while gently waving his hand. Yet, his face hardened again. Chung Myung clearly pointed out Sa-ma-seung's fault. That meant he had heard how rude he was to Mount Hua Sect leader. Then, he heard what I said at the gate from that distance. It was such a great distance that Sa-ma-seung hadn't even known about Chung Myung's existence. No, that can't be right. He must be mistaken. I must have been nervous to think such absurd thoughts. With a low smile, Sa-ma-seung hurried along. However, his steps were a little heavier than before. Chapter 92. Sa-ma-seung sat across from Mount Hua Sect leader Hyunjong and carefully observed him. Hyunjung. Hyunjung was the one who somehow managed to hold together the crumbling fragments of Mount Hua and prevented a total collapse of the sect. The sect leader of the Jungnam sect had evaluated Hyunjung as a man who had excelled in his position if only the circumstances hadn't been so disastrous. It's an over-evaluation. Hyunjung had never once shown excellence befitting his title. Anyone willing to sacrifice themselves for their responsibilities will receive a good evaluation. However, a person's greatness isn't judged by their character, but by their achievements. Sama Seung turned his head and looked around. To the left and right of Hyunjung, there were the martial arts head and the finance heads. The Un disciples, including Unam and Ungom, were also seated here. All of Mount Hua's major figures gathered to welcome him. This wasn't the first time he had seen this. Definitely. It felt a little different than before. At the previous conference, everyone he had seen looked tired of their lives and depressed. But now, it felt like there was no pressure binding them, and a subtle relaxation was felt around them. I don't like this. Sama Seung narrowed his eyes. It didn't matter what the source of their confidence was. Whether it was money or martial arts, it would just be groundless bravado. There was no way for Mount Hua to do anything except fall. Sama Seung was dissatisfied with the confident atmosphere the elders of Mount Hua exuded. I'm not sure if you'll enjoy the tea. When Hyunjung spoke, Sama Seung lightly nodded his head. It has a deep fragrance. I am glad you liked it. Sama Seung smiled. It indeed has a deep fragrance, but I don't enjoy the scent of plum blossoms. Hyunjung's eyes widened a little. However, he soon regained his composure and spoke in a soft tone. Is there a reason? There are many scents in the forest. The scent of soil, trees, and even the dews on the leaves. But when the plum blossoms are in full bloom, their scent is the only one around. It is so thick that it obscures everything around them. Just like the Mount Hua in the past. The world is a place where we exist together to live in harmony. That is why I prefer the subtle tea of green tea over the plum blossom, which breaks down that harmony. Sama Seung spoke calmly, but the undisciples couldn't hide their flushed faces. This was no different from openly talking back to the sect leader and criticizing the difference in authority. However, the Hyun elders took Sama Seung's word differently. Does he mean that back when Mount Hua had dominance, we refused to live harmoniously with others? Bringing this subject up at such a moment must mean that the Jungnam sect still hasn't forgotten their past grudges. This wasn't something the elder would dare to say in front of any other sect's elders. However, no one pointed out Sama Seung's actions. As Sama Seung said, respect depends on the one who has power. The moment one becomes unable to punish disrespect and rudeness, their authority slips into an illusion. With only a few words, Sama Seung managed to create the atmosphere he wanted and spoke with a smile. Sect leader, speak. We in the Jungnam sect have no intention of continuing this tradition and holding any more conferences after this one. Hyunjung frowned. Can I know the reason? Simple. Sama Seung smiled and spoke. It is because the exchange with Mount Hua doesn't help the Jungnam sect develop in any way. Isn't the gap between us already too wide to bridge? Hyunjung closed his eyes. It was such a disgrace to hear this and to see that smug look on his face. Even the elders sitting beside him struggled to contain their anger. This bastard! Hyunjung's beard trembled. This was intentional. How could someone say such a thing in front of their sect leader? Hyunjung slowly opened his eyes. The conference isn't just a ceremony to help with development. In the first place, this was done to help foster friendship between our two sects and grow closer. Isn't that just a facade? Sama Seung cut off Hyunjung's words. This! Hyunjung was boiling past the point of no return when Hyunsang pressed his knee down, begging him not to act out of line. Hyunjung looked at Hyunsang and then at Hyunjung as he bit his lower lip. Isn't he overdoing this? Who didn't know that the two sects were as incompatible as oil and water? Even Mount Hua was keenly aware of that fact. Mount Hua is a sect that boasts its history and tradition. Although it's no longer there, Mount Hua's name proudly stood alongside the 9 great sects and had aimed to be the greatest of them all. Even if it wasn't Mount Hua, but some lesser sect instead, it was impolite to behave like this to their face. Sama Seung couldn't be ignorant of what a wicked deed he was committing. Sama Seung glanced at Hyunyoung and smiled. Despite understanding the deeper meaning behind that smirk, Hyunyoung couldn't do anything but tighten his grip and endure. Martial arts sects are ruthless. Those who lack strength have no choice but to endure humiliation from the powerful. After glancing at each of the people gathered in the room, Sama Seung continued. The Jongnam sect and Mount Hua have never had a good relationship. To be honest, wouldn't it be more accurate to say that we are closer to being enemies? I'm sure that those in this room likely want to eat me alive and chew me down to the bone. It's not that bad. Then, is there anyone here who has good feelings towards me? No. Does anyone have any good feelings towards the Jongnam sect itself? No one answered. It wasn't difficult to answer yes, but why should they lie? They knew the truth, and so did Sama Seung. There is nothing more futile than trying to reconnect a thread which is already severed. Sama Seung's voice was firm, as if everything had been decided, and this was just a notice. When an elder speaks with such confidence, it usually means that the decision has already been settled, and they're simply relaying the message. So this wasn't just Sama Seung's will, but that of the entire Jongnam sect. Furthermore, the Jongnam sect was officially saying that they would stand atop Mount Hua and put them under their feet. A declaration that they would no longer regard Mount Hua as competition in the future. It was disgraceful, completely humiliating. And when no one dared to speak, Eunam spoke up. Isn't this a bit too sudden? It should have been done already. Elder. Seeing that Eunam didn't back down, Sama Seung glanced at him as if looking down on him. Then, do you think Mount Hua has the qualifications to compete with the Jongnam sect? Eunam went silent. He couldn't answer that. With a smile, Sama Seung continued. I think the Jongnam sect has done everything we could to treat Mount Hua with utmost kindness until now. Utmost kindness? You are acting too much. As Eunam raised his voice, Sama Seung laughed. What is too much? The Jongnam sect has forgotten the grudges of the past and helped Mount Hua till now. In fact, isn't it unfair for us to continue like this with Mount Hua? The conference has always been held in Mount Hua, and we've even provided a certain degree of wealth whenever we travel here for the event. Yet, despite our kindness, you still choose to blame us. This wasn't right. Eunam ground his teeth. The reason why the conference was held in Mount Hua was obvious. Jongnam did it to come and ridicule the crumbling Mount Hua and to show off their own martial arts. The wealth they provided as support to Mount Hua was just a pretense of keeping the sect from refusing to hold the conference. Sect leader. Sama Seung spoke resolutely. It might be hard to understand, but allow me to simplify it. Once you see the results of this conference, you will be the first to ask that this never happens to Mount Hua again. Think carefully about this if you don't want to ruin the children. Sama Seung got up from his seat, then left the room without letting his mood be affected by the change of atmosphere. While everyone else was too shocked and didn't know what to do, Hyunjung asked the question. Is this path the final one which the Jongnam sect has chosen? Sama Seung stopped walking and slowly turned his head to look back. Hyunjung's expressionless face left Sama Seung unable to discern the intentions behind his question. That isn't up to me to decide. With that, the foreign elder opened the door and left the room. Anguish filled the faces of those who were left behind. How can they say such a thing? Hyun-young couldn't hold back his anger and slammed the table, resulting cracks to appear on the table. But no one thought of blaming him. Eun-gum opened his mouth with a heavy feeling. Every time the conference is held, they've always been aggressive, but this is the first time they've acted so viciously. That's right, this is over the line. How can a mere elder speak like that to the sect leader? Isn't the Jungnam sect supposed to come and relay this directly? No one could hold back their anger and continued adding to each other's grievances. Among them, only Hyun-jung quietly shook his head with a sad face. Leave it alone. But sect leader, words are sometimes spoken in vain. Would our words have any meaning now? Eun-nam bowed his head. The others also bowed, their faces shifting between expressions of anguish and fury. Hyun-jung said, I can tolerate any amount of disgrace. Even if they spit back in my face, I can smile back at them. That isn't what I'm worried about right now. Then, I'm worried about the children. Eun-nam's eyes trembled. Looking at how he said it directly, surely the conference will be extremely daunting this time. I can endure the insults they cast on me, but what should I do if our children are going to suffer too? Hyun-jung's face turned bitter. As a sect leader of a weak sect, the burden he had to endure was too heavy. Then, even now, Eun-nam kept his mouth shut. He wanted to say, then we should stop the conference now, but before he could even finish speaking, he realized what situation they were in. It was a disgrace, worse than death for those learning martial arts, to give up in fear of an opponent. Moreover, the children can understand the situation well enough. If they are asked to surrender without a proper match, this will haunt them for the rest of their lives. My sins are too great. Hyun-jung sighed deeply. Nobody could find any words to comfort him, and so everyone decided to remain silent. Eun-gum, who was quietly listening to the conversation, spoke up at that moment. Sect leader, there is no need to think like that. Hyun-jung's eyes turned to Eun-gum. They want to show a clear gap between Mount Hua and themselves in order to spread the news that we're no longer worthy of being a prestigious sect within Shangxi. It would be a decisive blow for our sect, which has already fallen so far from our peak. Isn't that what they're aiming for? True, but we've run out of tricks up our sleeve. We don't need any tricks. Wouldn't it be enough as long as we don't let them win so easily? Sect leader, seeing Hyun-jung at a loss of words, Eun-gum slightly smiled as he spoke. Trust the children. Maybe we'll receive some good news. Eun-gum smiled as he received everyone's gazes filled with suspicion. Now, it's your turn to prove yourself, Chung Myung. Chapter 93. Inside the blue plum dorms, where the guests were housed, a strange atmosphere had settled. Sitting in the center chair, Chung Myung narrowed his eyes and mumbled, I don't like this. He had just finished his meal. A well-organized housing with mouth-watering food was the perfect way to fill the weary hearts and empty stomachs of those who had just climbed the mountain. But that very fact was off-putting to Chung Myung. Did they find a vein of gold somewhere? Mount Hua had to be inferior to the Jungnam sect in every aspect. He knew that there was no comparison between Mount Hua and Jungnam's wealth. Nevertheless, seeing that the gap had narrowed left Chung Myung displeased. Jong So-han glanced at him and smiled awkwardly. Chung Myung was normally a very gentle person. However, if one judged his true character to be gentle, they would be fooled. The Chung Myung that Jong So-han knew was like the sea. The sea calmly embraces everyone, but it turns into a wild maelstrom that swallows everything when angered. Chung Myung was precisely like that. He was usually gentle, but he would become genuinely terrifying when angry. Jung So-han smiled awkwardly and said, "It seems like Mount Hua has a bit of money now, great Sa-hyung." But in the end, aren't martial arts the most important thing? Even if they dress in fancy silk and eat luxurious meals, it doesn't mean anything if they lack the martial arts to support themselves. That is true. Jin Gum-ryung slowly got up and looked at the Sa-hyungs there. But he spoke in a voice loud enough for all to hear. "All I want is a complete victory." Everyone held their breath. Fame, wealth, martial arts, a complete victory where we exceed them in all facets. Otherwise, there is no meaning. If there is an opening left for Mount Hua to be compared to us, then it is a disgrace to the Jungnam sect. Did you forget? Our generation must make our sect into the greatest. A powerful determination shown in the eyes of the second-class disciples. Keep yourselves controlled. The way you all relax as if you're here on a refreshing holiday makes me sick. Don't forget what our purpose here is. Those who fail to live up to the Jungnam sect standards will never be forgiven. We will keep that in mind, Sa-hyung. We will never let our guards down. Clap, 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 clap. Then the door opened wide. Clapping his hand, Sa-ma-seung entered the residence. Excellent. Elder. Sa-ma-seung nodded with a smile as everyone got up to greet him. Jin Gum-ryung's words are exactly right. I feel embarrassed. If I had known that Elder was coming, I would have never said it. No. It was an absolutely wonderful statement. The disciples of the Jungnam sect need to have such a heart. Sa-ma-seung lowered his hand and smiled. In addition to that, yes, Elder. This time, the conference shouldn't just end with victory. We must defeat them so thoroughly that they would never dare to speak the Jungnam sect's name again. Do you understand what I mean? Jin Gum-ryung narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Your sparring will compare both sects' martial arts. It's common sense to be careful not to harm each other. Isn't that right? Sinking into thought, Jin Gum-ryung smiled. Elder, yes. Mount Hua's disciples seem to be quite sharp. It appears that they aren't what they used to be. Sa-ma-seung's expression hardened when he heard Jin Gum-ryung's suddenly weak tone. However, he relaxed as he listened to the following words that flowed from Jin Gum-ryung. It's a basic principle to avoid harm while sparring with one another. However, they do seem to be more skilled than expected, so there is a limit to how much we can hold back. If we want to avoid getting injured ourselves, we might need to break an arm or leg. Is that alright? Sa-ma-seung put his hand on his chin, trying to maintain his troubled facade. No, that would be unacceptable. No matter how important the spar is, it will mean nothing if our children get hurt. Everyone, you should focus on finishing this conference without getting injured as much as possible. Even. Sa-ma-seung smiled and continued, even if it means injuring your opponent instead. Jin Gum-ryung smiled and nodded. I will take good care of the sajes and finish this conference without any accidents. Good. Sa-ma-seung smiled and looked at Jin Gum-ryung. He wouldn't need to worry about the conference with a child like this anymore. In the future, when Jin Gum-ryung becomes the sect leader, he is sure to take the Jungnam sect to unprecedented heights. Of course, he was doing a good enough job now. Gum-ryung. Yes, Elder. I will not leave too many tasks to you, but I want to ask you one thing. Say it, Elder. Don't leave that cheeky bastard alone. A person's face flitted through Jin Gum-ryung's mind. Perhaps the others were also thinking the same thing. After all, only one person in Mount Hua was cheeky and arrogant. Are you talking about that child, Chung Myung? Yes. Chung Myung smiled brightly. Don't worry, Elder. I will make sure to break him of his attitude. You are short-sighted. Yes? Thinking that he had said something wrong, Chung Myung immediately bowed his head. That child has already done a great job by connecting the Unha Guild and Mount Hua. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. Yes. When everyone answered vigorously, Lee Songbek just quietly bowed his head. Lee Songbek couldn't help but feel horrible whenever Unha was mentioned. After giving him a brief glance, Sama Seung continued. From my point of view, it seems that Mount Hua trusts that child a lot. Yet, he has that kind of personality. Do you understand what I mean? I am a foolish disciple. It is hard for me to understand. The world is a place where people with true abilities will rise and overcome any obstacles. Sometimes, though, it is a place where people without any unique abilities gain momentum and make ridiculous achievements. It may be detrimental for the future of the Jungnam sect if that child is allowed to grow up like this. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. It might be too extreme, but isn't he still just a child now? Yes. With a hoarse voice, Sama Seung continued. Now, that child who barely makes a name for himself managed to say everything he wanted against me. What will happen when that child fully matures? It will be one or the other, exceptional growth or complete ruination. Isn't he more likely to be ruined? I can't accept that the possibility exists for that child to grow and develop in Mount Hua. That's why we need to nip this problem in the bud. I understand what Elder is saying. Chung Myung turned his head. Uryang. Yes, Sasuk. Son Uryang rushed forward from the back. Did you hear what the Elder said? Yes, Sasuk. Don't worry. I will thoroughly destroy his arrogant mouth so that he never mocks anyone again. That won't be enough. Make certain that he can never return to his past self. Entrench the fear of the Jungnam sect into his bones and make him regret this for the rest of his life. Yes, Sasuk. Chung Myung nodded. Son Uryang was the most capable of the third-class disciples. Although he was not the oldest, he had the greatest skills. His skills began to grow and stand out more prominently after the last conference had already ended. Mount Hua would not even believe this child was the same as back then. He would be the best disciple to handle Chung Myung. Chung Myung smiled brightly and turned to Sama Seung. Everything will be as you wish. I will make sure of that. Sama Seung nodded his head with a satisfied expression. I believe you. More than one could know. These were the children of the Jungnam sect that he raised with all his heart and soul. He held no doubts that all his efforts would help these disciples' skills explode and usher in a new heyday for the sect. And this conference would serve as an opportunity to announce that to the world. I will trample on them. An eerie chill rose in Sama Seung's eyes. Are you really doing this? My heart is pounding so hard. I might die. I went to the bathroom 12 times today. Ugh, disgusting. The third-class disciples couldn't sleep until late at night. Tomorrow, the day would finally come. Until now, there was no time to think about the conference. They were so focused on their training that even breathing was difficult. However, after taking a day off from training to preserve stamina, random thoughts dominated their minds. Can we really do well? Didn't Chung Myung say that we could? No, he's never seen those Jungnam guys though. True, but... Yunjong sighed. He knew the Sages were anxious about tomorrow, but he couldn't find any words to calm them. Because I'm going crazy too. His heart was pounding. When he turned his head and glanced to the side, even Jogul seemed nervous. So no one could sleep in the late hours before dawn, and they all gathered here. Yunjong scratched his head and asked, Chung Myung? Sleeping. His guts must be made out of iron. Does he not understand nervousness? Or was he also tense? Tomorrow was the conference. No, it is technically today, since midnight had already passed. Just the thought was making their hearts pound erratically. He's been sleeping for a while. I saw him stretched out like a dead man. He even snores. I'm envious of him. I'm going crazy here. As Yunjong opened his mouth, a muffled voice came. It's not that I have guts of iron, but it's your guts that are tiny like peas. Everyone's head shifted towards the stairs in unison. Chung Myung came down with a sullen face. What are you doing? You haven't slept at all and gathered here? Because I'm nervous. Nervous? Chung Myung tilted his head. He's back at it again. That bastard. How is he going to bully us this time? What? Again? Will he tell us that he'll kill us if we lose to them? That evil bastard! However, Chung Myung's following words deviated slightly from their expectations. Why are you so nervous? Huh? Isn't nervousness reserved for those who are unprepared? Yunjong responded. No, it isn't like that. We're just afraid that we might not be able to show a good performance tomorrow. Sahyung. Huh? Then is there anything Sahyung could do to improve if we turned back time and had 10 more days? None. Just the thought of 10 more days could make him sick. Yunjong couldn't imagine suffering through the crazy training for 10 more days. There's no such thing as nervousness for those who did everything they could. Sahyungs aren't nervous right now. You just don't believe in yourselves. But it's funny. If you are weak, then admit that you're weak. What's really important is whether or not you did your best to prepare. Sahyung, did you give your best effort? Yes. It was something they could say with certainty. The disciples all did their best. Then that's enough. Chung Myung snapped his finger. No matter what anyone says, I will admit that you have all done your best. So don't waste your time on useless thoughts and go to sleep. Getting enough sleep the night before a battle is also a skill to keep you in shape. Everyone nodded. Then go on. Where are you going? I need to train. But today is the conference. That's nice. However, my training is about 10 times more important than that. With those final words, Chung Myung walked out the door, and the third-class disciples all let out a sigh. Seriously, heading to practice? Seeing Chung Myung maintain his normal schedule, even on the day of the conference, everyone present felt like the worries they had seemed meaningless. Okay, let's get some sleep. Yunjong spoke lowly. Chung Myung is right. If we want to confidently answer that we've given our best effort, we'll need to sleep to get into perfect form. Yes, Sahyung. Everyone seemed to be in the same mood and got up together. Yunjong, who was watching the others head to their rooms, one after the other, looked at the door where Chung Myung had left. He's such a strange guy. With just a few words, he managed to ease everyone's worries. The disciples that feared they'd get no sleep until dawn suddenly began to feel relaxed and drowsy. Whatever the conference's outcome, the third-class disciples have become stronger thanks to Chung Myung's strange influence. Yunjong was sure of that. Chapter 94. Chung Myung looked around as he climbed up the mountain. She isn't here, right? Chung Myung, who was quite nervous that Yu Yi-sol would catch up with him, sighed deeply. What am I doing? Chung Myung had nothing in this world he feared. In the past, when he was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, there were people afraid of him, but he was never afraid of others. Wasn't the sect leader of the Shaolin sect even reluctant to meet him? But now, that same Chung Myung was in a situation where he avoided a little girl. What am I being made to deal with? It would be so much simpler if he could just hit her on the head, wrap her up with a rope, and toss her off a cliff somewhere. But since she's just an innocent nuisance, he can't beat her up, right? Huh? What about Baekchun? That bastard came at me first. There's a difference between a senior who picks a fight and a senior that's a nuisance. Well, for the first time in his life, no, for the first time ever, Chung Myung was avoiding others. What's become of me? Why do I need to avoid people this early in the morning? Chung Myung, who stopped to take a deep breath, was ready to run up again. Oh? He felt something. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. It's useless to try fooling an old ghost like me. You can't deceive... Huh? Chung Myung tilted his head. This key he was feeling was different from Yu Yi-seol's. Yu Yi-seol boasted a weird sense of non-existence. It was something that Chung Myung would have to heavily concentrate on feeling. So Chung Myung would listen for her footsteps instead. However, what he was feeling now was too strong and clear to be Yu Yi-seol. And 2 people? Not just one. Chung Myung's eyes narrowed, and he moved cautiously as he sensed the key. For 2 people to be meeting in this deep mountain so early in the morning, it felt like a conspiracy. I need to see what they're up to. Chung Myung's eyes began to sparkle. Swoosh. His feet began to swiftly cut through the wind and accelerate. Chung Myung quickly halted and melded into his surroundings as he approached the area that he felt the key coming from. And then he carefully snuck forward and stuck his head out to have a peek. Huh? Chung Myung blinked his eyes. No matter how much he tried to double-check if his senses were right, the sight in front of him didn't change. One of the 2 figures was someone Chung Myung knew, Baekchun. It wasn't strange for Baekchun to be here. After all, this was still Mount Hua's territory. But the other person standing there was unexpected. He wasn't from Mount Hua, and the situation seemed strange. Why is he here? Jin Gum-ryung. Jin Gum-ryung, one of the Jungnam's greatest disciples, stood opposite Baekchun with an odd expression. Why are the 2 of them meeting here? It was definitely a conspiracy. Chung Myung cautiously moved closer to listen in. You seem to be doing well. Jin Gum-ryung smiled brightly and spoke to Baekchun, but Baekchun's face clearly expressed his displeasure. You seem to be at ease. Isn't there a reason for that, Dong-ryung? Pfft. Jin Gum-ryung and Baekchun both turned their gazes toward the sudden sound. Ah, shit! Chung Myung desperately held his breath and concealed himself. It was almost unbearable for Chung Myung to restrain his laughter when he heard the word Dong-ryung, bronze dragon. The 2 looked at each other again. They probably thought it was just a passing beast. Baekchun's face contorted. Don't call me by that name. I am Baekchun. Don't think of throwing away the name your parents gave you. No matter what anyone says, you are Jin Dong-ryung. Ugh, please, just stop already. Chung Myung clutched the floor and tried not to laugh. Oh shit, I might die. Dong-ryung. Baekchun's real name is Dong-ryung? My stomach might rip at this rate. Chung Myung's body trembled and was cramped up as he fought to hold back his laughter. Baekchun's face quickly turned red as if it would burst. It's Baekchun. Fine, Dong-ryung. Wow, he is really losing it. Baekchun hated it so much that his face was burning red. But the other guy just kept calling him Dong-ryung. He has such a bad personality. Whether or not he knew about Chung Myung's internal evaluation of him, Jin Gum-ryung continued to speak with a smile. Isn't Mount Hua a great place to live? You look pretty good too, don't you think? What are you trying to say? I just wanted to see you. A smile drew on Jin Gum-ryung's lips. To see what kind of an ugly life that little brother of mine who ran away from home to beat his older brother was living in Mount Hua. You saw that 2 years ago, didn't you? I never get tired of kicking a defeated dog. Not even 100 times would be enough. Baekchun's face crumpled. This was Jin Gum-ryung's true character. He was merciless to those he considered weaker than himself. He usually disguises himself with a kind face, but he was rotten inside. How long had Baekchun been bullied by him? What do you say? If you get on your knees and beg, I can accept you into the Jungnam sect. Stop spouting shit. Baekchun looked straight at Jin Gum-ryung. I am Baekchun, the great Sahyung of Mount Hua's second-class disciples. My dream is to make Mount Hua into a well-known sect that stands above the Jungnam sect. So don't say such words in front of me again. Oh? Chung Myung looked at the 2 in front of him with shining eyes. Let's see. So these 2 are brothers. One, Kumryung, golden dragon, and the other is Dongmyung, bronze dragon. I really want to meet their father, at least once. He needed to meet the enemy that caused his belly such pain. What on earth did he think when he named his children like that? That's why Baekchun ran away. Baekchun spoke with a growl. Since I know you're just speaking hollow words, I'll ignore that remark. After all, I know that even if I begged, you would simply mock me and act like it never happened. That's just the kind of person you are. Being brothers is strange. You know me so well, despite being apart for so long. Jin Gomryung, who had been smiling until then, suddenly changed his expression and turned cold. You made the wrong choice. If you wanted to defeat me, you should have entered the Jungnam sect. Maybe then you might have had a chance. But you chose Mount Hua instead of the Jungnam sect? You fled into a crippled sect to defeat me? Even a dog would find this funny. Baekchun bit his lip. Do not look down on Mount Hua. Oh? Yes, you're right. The reason I joined Mount Hua was that you despised it. I will lead Mount Hua and defeat the older brother who ignored and looked down on me. Such a foolish idea. So stupid that it makes me feel dumb for listening. It's exactly like you. Ignoring the constant flood of spiteful words, Baekchun firmly said, In the beginning, I certainly was childish. But now, I really like Mount Hua. Living my life as Baekchun, great Sahyung of Mount Hua's second-class disciples, is the most rewarding experience for me. Oh? Chung Myung looked at Baekchun with a subtle sense of pride emanating from his eyes. So that's his story. He did say that he needed to grow stronger, so there must have been a reason behind it, right? Chung Myung felt a bit moved by Baekchun's words. This is so... You think it's rewarding to live as the disciple of a crumbling sect? In this ruined mountain? Has your mind gone astray? That son of a bitch! Hearing what this bastard had to say, Chung Myung grew furious. I just need to punish him once. Yes, Baekchun answered firmly. It might seem strange, but I understood once I stayed here. I'm not the sort of person who is happy living comfortably in a rich sect with nice food, clothes, and education. At the very least, this place needs me here. I can set a goal and help develop this sect. Mount Hua is a sect that has given me a goal to strive for. Furthermore, it is a home which embraced me affectionately. Affection? Jin Gomryung frowned. Such weakness. When I see you talking like that, I understand that you've lost your sense of reality. Let me tell you, you're already finished. As a result of your pathetic choice, you will live the rest of your life in humiliation, forever left behind as a third-rate martial artist. Nothing more than a servant. Meanwhile, you will watch me rise as the future sect leader of the Jungnam sect from your withered hovel. Well, I don't really care. I am going to live my life regardless. You're going to live your life like trash. Well, at least it will be fun for me to watch. Jin Gomryung said with a sly smile. But I'm not one to watch on the side for long. Rather than waste time waiting, I will show you tomorrow. You will see just how stupid it was for you to choose Mount Hua instead of the Jungnam sect. Jin Gomryung tilted his head as if contemplating something before a wretched sneer covered his face. No, maybe this was a good choice. After all, there's no better combination for a ruined sect than an idiot disciple. I don't mind you insulting me, but your foul mouth has no right to speak of Mount Hua. Watch yourself, or I'll tear that mouth of yours off. Someone like you? Jin Gomryung glared at Baekchun as he trembled in anger. After staring for a while, Jin Gomryung suddenly smiled. There's no need to rush. The time will come when you realize it. Neither you nor Mount Hua will be able to make their marks on the world after tomorrow. I'll make certain of that. Jin Gomryung glanced once more at Baekchun before descending the mountain. Baekchun sighed deeply as he stared at Jin Gomryung's slowly fading figure. Can I do it? Jin Gomryung is a strong man that always achieves his goals. Aside from his poor attitude, he was still more talented and greater than Baekchun. Baekchun bit his lip. I shouldn't let myself be shaken. He is Baekchun of Mount Hua. One day, he would become the sect leader of Mount Hua and lead everyone into glory. Baekchun, who was mumbling to himself, finally steeled his determination and turned around. Wow, look at this admirable kid. Ah, fuck, you scared me. Baekchun was so terrified at the sudden words that he fell backward on the floor. He was so shocked that he thought his heart would burst through his throat. When he finally settled down, he saw Chung Myung nodding his head with a pleased expression. Why are you here? Dongryung, Dongryung. Baekchun's expression crumbled when he heard Chung Myung's words, while the culprit himself struggled to hold back his repressive laughter. You heard everything. Oh my, Dongryung, I was amazed by your wonderful heart, which holds such pride for Mount Hua. Chung Myung nodded, while Baekchun sighed. Are you a ghost? I couldn't even feel your presence. Well, that is to be expected. I haven't done anything wrong, but don't tell anyone about this. Others might not think of this as a good thing. Don't worry, Sasuk. This is Chung Myung. I'm the man with the heaviest mouth in the world. Doesn't that mean that his mouth can't hold anything? Baekchun wrapped his head around the idea of being caught. No one except the sect leader and a few elders knew about this, but of all the people to find out. So Sasuk is Jin Gyeongryung's younger brother. Even though we're brothers, we don't have a friendly relationship. Our mothers are different. Baekchun sighed and tried to talk. Since I was little. Don't bother. Huh? I don't have time to listen to such trivial drama. It's obvious. Whether he's older or younger, you were defeated by your talented sibling and didn't get treated well, so you ran away from home and came to Mount Hua. Don't just summarize other people's lives. But it was right. You did well. Right. So, what? Baekchun tilted his head. I said that you did well, coming to Mount Hua. Chung Myung had a different expression from before. It wasn't the mischievous smile that scratched a person's nerves to anger them. Rather, it was simply a gentle smile. Then, Chung Myung spoke with a heavy voice. No matter your origins or what your story is, Sasuk is a disciple of Mount Hua. You weren't wrong to abandon the Jongnam sect and choose Mount Hua. We will prove it. Baekchun couldn't say anything. This didn't seem like a speech that should come from such a young child. Strangely, though, when Baekchun listened to Chung Myung's words, he felt his heart at ease. We'll prove it. When? When? Chung Myung chuckled. Today. And then he turned away. Soon, the sun would rise and the conference would begin. Let's run wild, Sasuk. He couldn't hear the other part, but now is the time to crush those bastards. Chapter 95. The day of the Mount Hua Jongnam Sect conference had finally dawned. Hyunjung was quietly looking at the second and third class disciples lined up in front of him. Seeing the hardened and stiff expressions on the faces of these children, Hyunjung felt his heart clench. Even the children lined up in front of him understood the weight of their burden at this conference. Hyunjung felt as if his heart would break. He wasn't sure when things had changed, but his burden should originally have been shouldered by the elders and the sect leader. However, at some time after the initiation of this conference, the responsibility of proving the sect's worth and defending its honor passed on to the sect's young disciples. Hyunjung believed that even the second-class disciples were too young to carry this duty, not to mention the third-class disciples. Still, he felt infinitely grateful to the children who withheld all complaints and stepped forward despite their worries. Sect leader. Hyunjung recognized the anxious atmosphere, and Hyunjung slightly raised his head. The sect leader had fallen into sentimental thoughts and left the children standing in silence for too long. Hyunjung coughed to ease himself out of his emotional thoughts and spoke with a soft voice. Everyone seems nervous. Hyunjung looked at the children and shook his head. You don't have to be so stiff. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. All you must do is use this as an opportunity to learn and grow. Hyunjung made eye contact with everyone as he spoke with determination. No matter what the outcome may be, you are all proud disciples of Mount Hua. All you need to do is remember that fact. It was crudely spoken. It was a speech that didn't rouse their morale or seek to inspire the students to defeat their opponents and bring glory to Mount Hua. But those words eased the disciples' tense minds, and their expressions began to soften. Hyunjung nodded when he saw that everyone had begun to relax. I will keep watching over you, so go. With that, Hyunjung turned and walked away. Hyunjung quickly followed after him. You won't go with them? No matter how difficult this conference may be, there is no need for those who will watch and those who will fight to arrive together. The children must also have things to say between themselves. Let them have their time together. Yes, sect leader. Hyunjung signaled to the other elders and undisciples before they quickly followed Hyunjung. As the second-class and third-class disciples sighed, one person stepped forward. Baekchun. He stood in front of everyone with a determined face. Today, we will fight the Jungnam sect. Baekchun's gaze landed on Chung Myung briefly before returning. As the sect leader said, there is no shame in losing. What is shameful is failing to do your best. When we fight as proud disciples of Mount Hua. Yes, Sa-young! Let's go! With a resolute expression, Baekchun led the second-class disciples. A fierce aura of determination emanated from the second-class disciples who followed behind him. Even Yu Yisol, who was the farthest back, showed a much more serious visage than usual. Yunjung snuck out to the front as the second-class disciples headed off, and the third-class disciples warmly welcomed him. What? Does the great Sa-young have something to say? No, let's just do this. Such days scare me. Seriously, I heard fighting turns people crazy. These bastards. Look at you bastards, thinking that I can act like Baekchun Sasuk. I get it, let's move already. My legs hurt. If you're going to be like this, let's all say something. Jogul Sa-young, go ahead and stand ahead of us. It will save some time. Yunjung took a deep breath. They were all such good kids in the past. How did things end up like this? Yunjung turned his head and looked at the culprit. Even though a massive event like the conference was happening, Chung Myung looked like he was dying from boredom. Chung Myung, huh? Do you have anything to say? Chung Myung laughed. Is there anything worth saying? Chung Myung turned his head and spoke calmly. Let's finish this quickly and go eat. Move it. Yunjung unwittingly smiled at Chung Myung's casual remark. Come, you brat. He didn't know about the others, but he was sure of one thing. Normally, Chung Myung was a madman, but at times like this, Yunjung felt reassurance by his presence. Let's go. Yunjung took the lead and guided everyone to the conference. Following him, Chung Myung's eyes seemed to glimmer. The Mount Hua Jungnam Conference is an event created for both sects to exchange techniques and experience the other. Of course, there was a deeper intent internally, since it was a way for the Jungnam sect to intervene with Mount Hua's growth and humiliate them. On the surface, however, both sects maintained the appearance that this event was held out of mutual respect. Therefore, this event never entertained visitors. Until now, only the members of both sects had gathered together to witness the exchanges, and this event was no different. At least, that's what everyone thought before they arrived at the hall. Whisper. Hyunjung stared with his eyes wide open. After passing through Mount Hua's gate, one would find the great training hall. Due to the nature of the event, they required a large space. Therefore, the conference was held here without exception. Until now, all of Mount Hua's and the Jungnam sect's disciples would line up on the left and right sides of this wide area. Today, however, a rather strange scene was playing out. What are they? An unknown crowd had gathered in the training hall, with more people continuing to pour in. What was more bizarre was that they each held some kind of item in their hands. Every one of them was carrying either chairs or tables. Hyunjung was taken aback by the unexpected situation. Eunam quickly approached him with an urgent face. "Sect leader, what happened here?" A massive swarm of people flocked to the front gate and demanded to see the conference for themselves. There were too many people gathered for us to refuse. Ugh. Hyunjung shook his head. Did the Jongnam sect call him here? If so, the purpose was obvious. Their goal must be to show how horribly they crushed Mount Hua. He didn't notice at first, but upon closer inspection, there were many colorfully dressed middle-aged men. Among them were some familiar faces to Hyunjung. He could tell that many of the people here were Shaanxi's officials. Even local celebrities were called, and all around them were people in official uniforms. Considering their influence, once they witnessed the events here, they would spread the news all over Shaanxi. This is bad. Hyunjung, who felt a bit anxious at that concerning thought, spoke in a lower voice. Don't you know that strangers aren't allowed inside without permission? But sect leader, aren't their intentions clear? It is true, but... Huh? A low voice was heard in Hyunjung's ears. Sect leader, I don't believe this is something we coordinated before, is it? Hyunjung turned his head. The Jongnam sect elder, Sama Seung, approached them with a slightly embarrassed face. Hyunjung paid particular attention to his embarrassed expression. Did the Jongnam sect really not do this? If Sama Seung had gathered everyone here, there was no reason for him to be so bewildered. He would have leisurely walked in with a grin. Hyunjung snuck a glance at Eunam. What happened? I tried to stop them, but the person who brought them is me, sect leader. Both Hyunjung and Sama Seung shifted their sights to the new arrival and witnessed a familiar smiling face approach them. Master Hwang! Master Hwang? Hwang Munyak of the Eunha Merchant Guild. It's quite exhilarating. Master Hwang arrived and the two representatives greeted him. Still, they each had their own doubts. With a bright smile, Hwang Munyak said, Since the conference is being held, I thought there would be some excitement, so I invited an audience. Hyunjung frowned and was about to refute when Sama Seung's response beat him to the punch. I don't think it's a bad idea. Since this will be the last conference, it would be all right to make it a grand event. Sama Seung held the power of the Jongnam sect. Hyunjung sighed. If Master Hwang had invited this crowd and the Jongnam sect agreed to it, it would be difficult for Mount Hua to oppose the decision. Was he going to tell those who just climbed Mount Hua to return with nothing to show for it? I can't do that. Word would spread that Mount Hua was too harsh to their guests. It would be even worse when considering the influence of the officials here. It will be difficult. It would be difficult to deal with them. In the end, Hyunjung had to sigh and smile. Sure, since you're here, please enjoy yourselves. Thank you for understanding, sect leader. Well then. Master Hwang smiled and turned around. The others who gathered also smiled and headed to the audience seats prepared by Master Hwang. Master Hwang, who led the crowd, raised his head and looked at Chung Myung. Will this be fine? Chung Myung nodded. Exchanging glances, Master Hwang was left with an awkward feeling. This young disciple always surprises me. What is he going to do this time? It was none other than Chung Myung who requested Master Hwang gather the influential people of Shaanxi. Chung Myung secretly visited Master Hwang and spoke to him in Hwalm. First, I need you to gather all the famous people you can. I did what I was told. I don't know what will happen next, young disciple. Looking at Hwang Munyak's gaze, Chung Myung smiled. The best way to taste success is with others watching. What's the point of fighting each other when there's no one around? Even if they produce good results, no one would believe it, and the Jongnam sect can simply deny anything Mount Hua says. Therefore, he had to make sure that everyone could see the results with their own eyes. The preparations are done. Huh? No, nothing. How could anyone else know what he had planned? Anyway, my Sahyung, I'm using my head. Hurry and take back what you said about me being stupid. Right. I suppose a small brain is still a brain. Can't you compliment me? How great would it be if you could praise me to my face? Jogul frowned and leered at Chung Myung. Why do you keep talking to yourself? Are you nervous? While Chung Myung sighed, the preparations were finished. The chairs and tables were neatly arranged, the audience was seated, and the servants brought everyone refreshments too. It looks like it's starting. Someone's nervous voice could be heard. Eunam walked to the middle of the training hall. Standing in the center, he looked around and clapped his hands. Straightening his chest, he took a deep breath and loosed a solemn and hoarse voice. Then, let's begin the Mount Hua Sect conference. The atmosphere grew heated in an instant. Chapter 96. I'm excited. Thanks to Master Huang, I'll get to see such an interesting event. Hwang Munyak smiled at the praise pouring in from the people around him. I have to thank you for accepting the invitation. I hope you didn't have a hard time coming all the way out here. I couldn't afford to miss this rare opportunity. Blessings and cheers came and went. However, Hwa Munyak didn't ignore that many of the people here were carefully examining the situation and trying to determine who would rise to the occasion at this conference. There was no way that the people gathered here were simply there for idle entertainment. Their interest was in the next generation of the two factions. Among them, most were there for the Jongnam sect. The merchants and sects often seemed to be close, yet distant at the same time. Considering how quickly a faction can rise or fall, everyone was sensitive to information concerning the strength of a sect. They were all hoping to invest in the next strong sect. After all, power attracts wealth. They are trying to estimate the future of the Jongnam sect by evaluating the younger generation's performance here. A fight between Mount Hua and the Jongnam sect. Isn't the opponent a bit disappointing, though? You're right. If they were trying to display their strength, they should have called for a strong sect. Will they really be able to display their best against Mount Hua? The public spoke in a hushed tone. This would be an objective evaluation. Hwang Munyak didn't believe their assessments were wrong. Mount Hua now seemed like a joke compared to its past 100 years ago. There was a time when the Jongnam sect could do nothing compared to Mount Hua, which held one of the top positions among the 9 great sects. However, Mount Hua lost its place and collapsed, while the Jongnam sect grew to attain a position as one of the 10 great sects. But Hwan Munyak's gaze fell upon the disciples of Mount Hua gathered at one side. Hwan Munyak frowned as he struggled to see Chung Myung. I don't think he's the type to lose. So is that child hiding some kind of clever trick? Hwan Munyak smiled. It's a bit unpleasant to see others rushing into Mount Hua, but Mount Hua's reputation needs to spread for it to recover. So this time, I cooperated with the young disciple without another thought. Hwan Munyak's heart swelled with anticipation at what might soon unfold. Standing in the center, Eunam looked at both sides of the hall where the disciples of Mount Hua and the Jongnam sect stood opposing one another and spoke. It was a bit flustering since an audience had suddenly appeared, but there was no difficulty leading it since the conference had become a tradition. First, the representatives of each faction's disciples will engage each other one-on-one. 10 representatives of the second-class disciples will perform. Eunam spoke resolutely. Initiate. As soon as his words ended, one person from each side stood up. Jin Gomryong and Baekchun. Each of them was the leader of their sect's second-class disciples. Sahyung, do your best. You must win. At the cheers of his juniors, Baekchun took a deep breath. His hardened face could show how nervous he was. He turned his head, gave a final glance at his juniors, and proceeded to the center of the arena. Across from him, Chung Myung strode forward in a relaxed manner. The two men came face to face with one another. As expected, along with the Eunha Guild, there was another large figure present. The head of the Daebung Merchant Guild, Wi Jage, smiled upon seeing Chung Myung. Chung Myung is said to be a remarkably talented disciple that will one day lead the Jongnam sect. He has a truly fantastic presence.
That's how a young hero should be.
Chung Myung, donning a white robe and wielding a wooden sword in one hand, captured the crowd's attention.
But doesn't the one across from him also look great?
When you say it like that, well, they seem to look alike. Like black and white, two contrasting sides of a painting. Baekchun, wearing a black uniform, stood tall against his foe.
It feels like anticipation is rising in the air. But will Mount Hua's disciple really be able to match Chung Myung?
I don't know. Mount Hua has indeed been weathering the storm for quite a while. But recently, it feels like something about the sect has changed. If you think about the sect's impressive legacy, there may be some unexpected results. Although that was said, no one genuinely thought Baekchun would defeat Chung Myung. The Mount Hua of today couldn't be compared to their past glory. Hasn't the crowd's lack of faith been proven by how they had already severed their ties with the sect long ago? If they believed there was still any hope left for Mount Hua, they would have never burned their bridges so completely. What the audience expected was to see how strong the Jongnam sect had become. Sama Seung's expression stiffened as he overheard the crowd's idle banter. He understood that they were only speaking empty pleasantries to save Mount Hua's dignity, but it left him feeling dirty.
Show them, Chung Myung.
The reality was that Mount Hua was in no position to even be mentioned alongside the Jongnam sect. Hyunjung bit his lip and looked at Baekchun.
Show them everything you've got.
So that there were no regrets. While everyone had their own expectations and concerns, Chung Myung and Baekchun faced off against each other. And Chung Myung spoke first. You came without running away. Baekchun answered with a determined face. I am the great Sahyung of Mount Hua's second-class disciples. There's no way that I could run. Big words coming from you. Chung Myung raised his sword and pointed at Baekchun. Well, the smallest dogs are known to bark the loudest. Are you going to be bitten by a dog then? I made a mistake. You aren't even a dog. You! Try it once. As I said yesterday, I will show you how insignificant you truly are. Baekchun didn't bother responding. Instead, he briefly glanced at where Hyunjung was sitting. The sect leader is watching. Now was the time to set aside his personal grudges and selfishness. I am the second-class disciple, Baekchun. Baekchun locked eyes with Chung Myung. He too raised his wooden sword and squared off with his opponent. Everyone watched as tension ignited the air. One was the representative of Mount Hua, and the other was the Jongnam sect's pride. Normally, it would make sense for these two to face off against each other at the end and close the event. However, according to the conference's tradition, these two will be the ones to open the event's proceedings. In a way, this battle would potentially determine the conference's outcome entirely on its own. How could the audience not be bursting with anticipation? The moment someone was about to speak, Baekchun moved. Pah! The dull sound of the floor being struck clearly reverberated. Continuing to sprint forward, Baekchun attempted to stab at Chung Myung's neck with efficient moves lacking unnecessary flair. Swoosh! Instead of facing the incoming blade directly, Chung Myung deftly sidestepped and avoided the strike. Swish! Baekchun's sword quickly pursued Chung Myung. His wrist seemed to shake slightly, and soon an illusory sword technique was unleashed. It appeared as though dozens of strikes were being unleashed. Mount Hua's colorful sword arts enveloped the training hall.
Oh, amazing! The children of Mount Hua seem to have great skills.
It was a splendid technique that made the people watching admire it. Although the sword technique was displayed through a wooden sword, its sharpness matched that of a real blade. Yet, Chung Myung stayed facing it. It was a wonder whether there was any way to deal with this onslaught. The second and third class disciples of Mount Hua could not help but clench their fists as they watched. Jogul excitedly exclaimed, "As expected of Baekchun Sasuk, Sasuk's Chongyang Fierce Tiger Sword is truly the best." Mount Hua's disciples couldn't hide their excitement. They knew just how much Baekchun had trained until his bones gave away. After being humiliated at the last conference, Baekchun hadn't forgotten the disgrace he felt as he fully devoted himself to training. It was Baekchun who volunteered for the closed-door training. The person capable of living the most pleasant life on Mount Hua chose to lock himself away and focus solely on the sword. How could the disciples not support such a man? Baekchun's sword shadow splendidly pursued Chung Myung as it cleanly sliced the air. Each and every movement was sharp enough to wound. It was hard to tell what was real or fake as the illusory blade mixed in complex movements. Hyunjung, who carefully observed every detail, clenched his fist. When did that child reach such a level? At that level, he wasn't far behind the undisciples. He knew Baekchun was talented, but this was astonishing. The eyes of Mount Hua's martial artists were colored with hope as they proudly watched Baekchun's display. Perhaps it might be different this time. Even Yunjong couldn't hide his shock and awe. Chung Myung, Sasuk is pushing him back. Yes, maybe we can win. No way. Huh? Yunjong looked back at Chung Myung. Chung Myung was leaning back on his chair with a sullen face. If you want to win, you need to hit your enemy, but he can't even land a single blow. Still, we can... Does Sahyong's face look like someone that's sure of their victory? Yunjong turned his head and looked at Baekchun again. Soon, he had no choice but to harden his expression. Baekchun's face seemed to crumble as he appeared to be struggling. Why? Baekchun was swinging his sword with all his might. The first step is intensely taken at the correct angle. Ki is raised and flows through the firm lower body through to the fingertips. Eventually, his sword is brandished with ki and swung with every fiber of his being. Lightly and lightly, light as a butterfly, but sharp as a knife. However, the light yet sharp sword never reached Chung Myung's body. Why won't it reach? Why? So far away. The opponent standing in front of Baekchun seemed too far away. It was like standing in front of a cliff that pierced high into the sky. A cliff he couldn't dare to climb or cross. Soaked in fear and perspiration, Baekchun screamed, unable to even wipe the sweat on his face. Ah! One devastating blow. Baekchun's final strike displayed an illusion of several swords, all piercing at Chung Myung. It was then... Kang! Chung Myung wielded his sword for the first time and deflected Baekchun's technique. With the sword stopped, the ki covering the field disappeared. Only then could Baekchun clearly see Chung Myung's face. Unlike Baekchun, who was sweating and drenched in sweat, Chung Myung had neither shed a single drop of sweat nor had any difficulty breathing. Instead, he simply observed Baekchun with a cheeky smile covering his face. Have you had your fun? You stupid brat. No matter how hard you struggle to learn Mount Hua's martial arts, do you really think you could even touch the hair on my head? Chung Myung's sword pierced Baekchun at an imperceptible speed. Baekchun fell to the floor with a gasp, unable to scream as he was struck in the shoulder. Gah! Groaning, he forced himself to stand. When he raised his head, he saw Chung Myung approaching him with a leisurely smile. You'll soon understand with your body just how much of an idiot you are. Without mercy, Chung Myung's sword fell on Baekchun. Chapter 97. The difference was known from the start. Chung Myung has been recognized for his talent since childhood. Among the people Baekchun knew, the one most suited to be called a genius was Chung Myung. He had already experienced defeat. In the last conference and even before that, Baekchun had never won against Chung Myung. He was only ever left with the bitter taste of defeat. But I thought I could narrow the gap this time. Because he worked so hard. Chung Myung criticized his efforts as misguided, but Baekchun endured a bone-cutting ordeal for that training. At least, he was confident that he trained twice as much as Chung Myung. He believed that even if he couldn't win, he would have at least slightly bridged the divide between them. But the reality was worse than he had imagined. Chung Myung's sword struck Baekchun's ankle. As he staggered back, he desperately clenched his teeth to sober himself enough to regain balance. Baekchun's ankle would have been severed if this was a real sword. Thankfully, it wasn't a real sword but a wooden one. But conversely, since this wasn't a real sword, he couldn't even accept defeat so easily. Why can't I reach you? Why? I tried so hard. Chung Myung's sword flew again and hit Baekchun's other thigh. The impact almost broke the bone. For a moment, Baekchun's distraught mind was lost to pain. He neither groaned nor screamed. He slapped the floor with his wooden sword and tried to attack again. Ah! His sword aimed for Chung Myung's head. A simple blow, but it was fast and sharp. Slow. However, Chung Myung took a step back and twisted his body to negate the attack. And Chung Myung's sword struck Baekchun's left shoulder. His flesh burst from the impact, and blood began to drip from the wound. It would only take one more attack for Chung Myung to perfectly finish this match. However, he didn't end it and stepped back instead. He looked down at Baekchun with an arrogant expression. Baekchun, with one hand, pressed heavily on the ground and tried to raise himself up again. Bloodshot eyes. Despite the pain, he glared at Chung Myung with a fierce will. Oh? Chung Myung looked at Baekchun a bit surprised. You're struggling so hard just to stand, but your spirit is still alive. Chung Myung raised his sword at Baekchun. But that spirit is all you have. You will remain unable to even touch the hem of my clothes for the rest of your life. Why? You must really lack a brain. I already told you. Taking a look around, Chung Myung spoke. That's how great the difference between Mount Hua and the Jungnam sect is. The martial arts of Mount Hua cannot compare to the martial arts of the Jungnam sect. 100 years may pass. Even if you had 1,000 years, nothing would change. An arrogant declaration, but no one could refute Chung Myung. Even the elders of Mount Hua could only listen and bite their lips, but they could not bring themselves to decry his remark. Hyunjong shut his eyes tightly. How long must we endure this? How far does he intend to go? Who could understand this situation? The elders of the sect were unable to condemn or punish a second-class disciple despite him uttering such humiliating words. My disciples, forgive me. But Chung Myung's arrogance didn't end there. He smiled at Baekchun. If you still want to catch up to me even after this, then you better leave Mount Hua. There's no future here. The only thing left for this ruined sect is ridicule. Baekchun clenched his teeth. I am a disciple of Mount Hua. Well, that's fine. Then if that's the case, Chung Myung took his sword in hand and rushed at Baekchun. Baekchun tried to somehow defend himself, but his arm failed to respond. A vicious sound rang out as Baekchun was struck another 12 times before he collapsed. Thud. Chung Myung glanced at Baekchun, who fell unconscious and grinned. I need to show you. My bad. It's a little too late now. With a sly smirk, he retrieved his sword and stepped over the body of Baekchun. Steadily walking, he returned to his group. Defeat. A complete defeat. Sayong! Sasuk! At the moment, all of Mount Hua's disciples ran to the center of the hall. Sasuk! Nobody touch him! Baeksang, who carefully hid the unconscious Baekchun, was silent for a moment as he bowed his head. Then, he turned his head to glare with a grim expression. Isn't this too much? Chung Myung, who was walking back to his sect, turned and looked at Baeksang. What's too much? This is just a spar. How can you injure your opponent so harshly? Spar? Isn't that exactly why he ended up like that? What? Chung Myung smiled. If this had been a battle with real swords, do you think he would simply be unconscious? It's because this was a spar that he's able to stay alive. Am I wrong? How dare you? Don't get too angry. Chung Myung spoke with a grin. Even I'm a bit flustered here. I didn't think he would be so weak. I thought he could at least defend himself. Maybe I expected too much. I apologize. Baeksang bit his lip so hard he nearly drew blood. A perfect defeat. And an over-the-top mockery afterward. Baeksang wanted to drag that guy out and tear him apart if he could. But there was nothing Baeksang could do about it. Take Sahyung to the treatment hall, right now! Yes! The sages, holding Baekchun, quickly carried him away while Baeksang pulled out his wooden sword. Let's see what this Jongnam bastard's sword is worth. There's no need to refuse. Sohan. Yes, Sahyung. Go face him. Yes! Jong Sohan entered the arena with a grin. Seeing him walk so leisurely, Baeksang tightly grasped his sword. Contrary to the oppressive atmosphere forming between the disciples, the audience was enthused and deeply interested. So astonishing! Baekchun was stronger than I thought, but Chung Myung's achievements exceeded my expectations. He is truly a man worthy of the praise he received. With such a fine disciple, wouldn't the Jongnam sect be eligible to compete with the top sects? I know! Hwang Munyak's expression went stiff. This is why they are merchants. A man was being carried away in a miserable condition, but no one paid any attention to that. The crowd was only interested in Chung Myung and how they could grasp onto the Jongnam sect in order to grow their wealth. Hwang Munyak isn't much different from them, but he couldn't hide his disgust at their actions in such moments. This is a disastrous defeat. Baekchun and Chung Myung. Even if the representatives of two sects faced off, such a one-sided defeat was normally not possible. Mount Hua's momentum would halt with such embarrassing results, and morale would sink. Until the end, Baekchun never managed to land a single blow on Chung Myung. If the conference continued like this, Mount Hua would never be able to regain its past glory. No, most likely, the sect's downfall would accelerate because no one would be willing to acknowledge them. No matter how heavily Hwang Munyak supported them, reviving the sect would be impossible. This would be a death sentence. What the hell are you thinking? He thought that Chung Myung would have some plan, so he gathered the most influential people he could. But this was starting to go horribly wrong. Was I overestimating the young disciple? Hwang Munyak looked at Chung Myung. Is Sasuk fine? There's no way he's fine. Is he seriously hurt? Badly. Chung Myung's dispassionate response evoked a serious and angered reaction from Yoonjung. No matter how bad our relationship is, that man is still our Sasuk. Are you seriously fine with our senior receiving such horrible treatment? Calm down, Sahyung. You bastard! I told you to calm down. Yoonjung was shaken at how calm Chung Myung was. This was different from Chung Myung's usual nature. Did you ever think he could win? Yoonjung bit his lip. He didn't expect Sasuk to win, but just the bare minimum at least. Baekchun was someone that carried the expectations of everyone in Mount Hua. Perhaps the reason Yoonjung was angry now wasn't because of Baekchun's injuries, but because of his horrible defeat. Is the gap between the Jongnam sect and us this big? The 10 great sects. The 10 great sects are incredibly powerful, but the disciples of Mount Hua never cared much about it, probably because Mount Hua once belonged to that same group. Although the sect had fallen, Yoonjung believed that they could one day compete against the 10 great sects again with enough effort and luck. However, it seemed like those sects were much stronger than he imagined. Chung Myung smiled bitterly. If everything could be solved by effort alone, then everyone in this world could become a master. What matters isn't how hard we try. It's about how you apply your effort. Watch. Take a good look from now on. All the second-class disciples will lose. All of them. There's not even one here who can defeat them. No, there is one, but I don't think that person will fight. Yunjong's face went stiff. In the last conference, there were 2 draws and 8 losses. That itself was a disaster. And this time, there won't even be a draw? If we lose like this, it'll be miserable. But Chung Myung stared at Yunjong with wide eyes. Lose? Who's going to lose? What? You said, that's just the second-class disciples. Chung Myung blinked. Who's going to let those Jongnam bastards return from Mount Hua with a victory? Who will let them? As long as my 2 eyes are open, I will never see that happen. Even if my eyes get dirt in them, I refuse to see that sight. So relax your body. Maybe we should try and do something flashy. No, It was then. Ugh! Yunjong quickly turned his head, only for the sight of Baeksang, lying brutally beaten on the floor to flood his vision. Jong Sohan kicked the fallen man while he was down. Think you can still put up a fight? Ugh! It seems you're all talk. Jong Sohan looked at Baeksang and then at the disciples of Mount Hua. Then, he made an arrogant gesture as if looking down on them. Chung Myung's mouth opened. No, but that bastard! Catch him again! The third-class disciples rushed in and grabbed Chung Myung, who was ready to charge in. Seeing that, Jong Sohan was dumbfounded and laughed. I get to see all kind of things here. Well, you're just an unknown sect, so it's understandable. Oh! Chung Myung's eyes widened. Let's see how long you can keep smiling. You were the one who called for me. Now it's too late to regret it. Chapter 98. Sect leader. Hyunjong just closed his eyes without saying anything. Shouldn't we stop this? Hyunsang spoke with a trembling voice, but Hyunjong couldn't answer him. Stop? How does one stop this? They were in the presence of so many influential leaders. We can't handle the Jongnam sect. If we continue, the children will only get injured, so it might be better to end this now. Was that what he should say? That would be a complete disgrace to Mount Hua's name. Even if Mount Hua was on the verge of collapse. No, since they were on the verge of collapse, they have something they must absolutely protect. Their name and their pride. If they were unable to safeguard their pride and the reputation of their name, then Mount Hua would no longer be a top-class sect facing ruination. They would truly become a third-rate sect, undeserving of respect. That would be the moment that Mount Hua truly collapses. Hyunjong couldn't allow that. Not for the sake of his own honor, but to protect the possibility that Mount Hua could someday be revived. So, as the sect leader, he could only remain silent in this situation. However, the circumstances were so bad that even Hyunsang, who understood Hyunjong's plight, couldn't help but speak out. Consecutive losses. 9 times in a row. They had already achieved the worst outcome of any conference yet. But the biggest issue wasn't about winning or losing, but the content of the battles. 9 disciples went forward, and not a single one of them could even touch their opponent. It was like watching a child challenge an adult. No, maybe that would be less tragic than this. All the important leaders of Shangxi were watching. How can we handle this disgrace? Hyunjong's eyes trembled. It felt like his 5 viscera were being torn apart inside his body. It wasn't the humiliation that bothered him. It was the despair his disciples were experiencing. Unable to gauge the strength of their opponent, they pushed these children into hopeless battles. thinking of the emotional impact this would have on the children who suffered because of the incompetent elders. The sect leader wanted to chop himself to pieces. Sect leader, Hyunjung, opened his eyes as he let out a sigh.
This is saddening.
But
aren't you upset with me?
It was then. The last of the second-class disciples fell to the floor as his sword fell from his hand. For a swordsman to lose their sword is a greater disgrace than death. The Jungnam sect's disciple was so skillful that they only aimed for the wrist until they achieved their desired results. I don't understand how a swordsman could let go of his sword. Doesn't Mount Hua teach you what that means? Mockery. Even with such insulting ridicule, no one could speak out. 10 consecutive losses. There was no result more disastrous than this. The faces of Mount Hua's elders were horribly contorted. Did it have to turn out like this? They thought they had finally gotten the opportunity to resurrect Mount Hua. Good things had constantly been happening lately, but they were too immersed in their dreams. They forgot how cruel reality is. In the end, Mount Hua is a martial arts sect. Any luxury is meaningless if it isn't supported by strength. Everyone there became keenly aware of this harsh fact. Well done. Yes, Elder. Sama Seung patted Arko on the shoulder. This result was satisfactory. Not only did everyone win, but every battle was entirely one-sided. The most encouraging aspect was this was accomplished in full view of Shaanxi's officials. Now, Mount Hua's fame will fall to the ground and never rise again. Hadn't they dreamed of this situation countless times over the past few generations? Sama Seung felt honored that he would be present to witness the sect's long-cherished desire be fulfilled. Perhaps by now, the audience understood the situation. Unsurprisingly, murmured gossip could be heard.
This is too one-sided. Still, I had some expectations for Mount Hua. It seems that the past is the past, and the present is the present. Mount Hua can no longer be thought of as it was in the past.
Didn't we already know that?
Still, this is too miserable. In fact, I really can't tell if the Jungnam sect is strong, or if Mount Hua is just too weak.
Isn't it both?
A pity. So unfortunate. It seems like Mount Hua is really finished. All in vain.
Sama Seung smiled as he heard it. Public opinion had shifted towards the Jungnam sect. However, Sama Seung's purpose here wasn't to elevate the name of his sect. His goal was to send Mount Hua plummeting into the abyss. To do that, even the sprouts needed to be burned to the ground. Now is the time to end this. Did you see what your seniors did? Yes, Elder. The third-class disciples of the Jungnam sect looked determined. Do not hesitate. Sama Seung's eyes shone. A lion does its best even when hunting a rabbit. Do not show mercy. You need to destroy them so horribly that they never think of learning martial arts again. Yes, I'll keep that in mind. Sama Seung looked up at the sky with a sly grin. Such a clear day. And such a good day, too. Yunjung was at a loss for words. He couldn't bear to look at the second-class disciples gathered on the side. Even without seeing their expressions, he could tell how much despair they were drowning in. And it was the same for the third-class disciples. The difference between our sect is this big. The conferences, held until now, also ended in defeat. But it was never like this. It was never so one-sided. This conference gave off the feeling of a man casually stepping on a gathering of ants. That was when they realized that Mount Hua had never dealt with the true Jungnam sect. Is it our turn? The faces of the third-class disciples darkened. It was true that they trained under Chung Myung, but the gap in abilities that they witnessed completely crushed their confidence. No, everyone has probably given up. That wasn't even the main problem. Yunjung looked at Chung Myung, who was sitting next to him, and gasped. He held his breath. Crack. The sound of teeth gnashing made his heart sink. Chung Myung's face was boiling red like it would explode. Every time one of the seniors was defeated, Chung Myung's face would turn a slightly deeper shade of red. He now looked like a red plum. Seeing Chung Myung's face, Yoonjung grabbed the hem of his uniform. This bastard is going to lose control soon. 3 years in the temple, and one becomes good at reciting scriptures. 3 months next to Chung Myung, and one will become a master of reading the room. Yoonjung spoke with a trembling voice. Chung Myung, let's calm down. Calm down? When Yoonjung heard Chung Myung's crooked voice, he felt his heart sink. No, he couldn't give up. This was a conference between 2 sects. Not just the sect leader, but the people of the Jungnam sect and Shangxi were watching. If this guy had lost control, something even worse than the second-class disciples losing would happen. Yoonjung began to look at Chung Myung as if trying to soothe a rabid dog. Chung Myung, think carefully. Remember what you said yesterday. In order for a person to accomplish great things, patience is the most important thing. Patience. Right, patience. Sahyung. Yes, Chung Myung. I remember those words well. I've been thinking. About? Chung Myung turned his head slowly, very slowly to the side, and matched Yoonjung's gaze. And Yoonjung saw him. Chung Myung's eyes were half out of control. Chung Myung growled like an animal and stood up. Don't have a sense of patience in me. That isn't something to be proud of, you bastard. Eunam took a deep breath. His face was pale, no longer able to handle this. He wanted to walk out and leave, but unless the sect leader instructed him, he couldn't stop. Next, we will hold the exchanges of the third-class disciples. Of them, it was then. Catch him! Don't ever let go of him! Chung Myung, you're supposed to go last! People are watching! People are watching! Please, don't do this! Eunam was bewildered as he looked at the third-class disciples. It seemed like they were united in trying to block someone as that person continued to push forward with glistening eyes. Chung Myung? What's wrong with that kid? Eunam had his doubts, but he had to finish his speech. This was his role, and there were many people watching. So the vanguard is... But Eunam's words were cut off once again. As soon as he tried to announce the competitors, Chung Myung escaped from Miss Sahyung's clutches and jumped forward. Phew! Chung Myung stepped into the arena and took a deep breath. Then, he looked to the Jungnam sect side and spoke. One of you, quickly get up here. Anyone works, come up quick. Sama Seung spoke. That crazy bastard. He knew that this child was crazy, but this was a whole different level. Not just the Jungnam sect, but he even dared to speak such arrogant words in the presence of Shangxi's officials. Elder, calm down. Jin Gum-neung quickly stopped Sama Seung from losing his composure. We can't run around and fall into his pace. He'll be in pain soon enough. Seeing that Sama Seung was still greatly displeased, Jin Gum-neung coughed and called out, Woo-ryang. Yes, Sasuk. Son Woo-ryang, the disciple chosen to deal with Chung Myung, resolutely nodded his head. The schedule has changed, but it doesn't make any difference to us. Complete your role. Yes, Sasuk. Don't worry. Son Woo-ryang grabbed his wooden sword and quickly arrived in front of Chung Myung. Then, he aimed his sword at Chung Myung. I will crush that arrogant mouth of yours. I'm Jungnam Sect's... Instantly, Chung Myung disappeared from where he stood and manifested in front of his foe. Son, he saw it. A furious Asura-like visage appeared in front of him. The figure seemed like it was coated in darkness. Darkness? In broad daylight. It wasn't dark. Something covered his sight. Since it was right in front of him, this is a fist? At that moment, unlike anything the crowd had heard since entering Mount Hua, an explosive sound echoed through the hall. It rotates. Son Woo-ryang's body spun through the air more than a dozen times before falling to the ground. Son Woo-ryang's body, which was plastered to the floor, convulsed pitifully as if he had some medical condition. Seeing his collapsed enemy, Chung Myung spoke as if dumbfounded. I'm not joking around. I'm going to make you all beg for death. Chapter 99. A roaring sound that nobody could have heard in their lives. The audience gathered at Mount Hua discovered that the collision between a human's fist and another's face could create such a violent sound and rotate. Son Woo-ryang, who was hit, rotated in the air and swish. Blood poured from his nose like a waterfall as his body spun through the sky.
Maybe if I do it properly, I can create a rainbow.
A rainbow made from blood. Was there anything more horrifying than that? It felt like the line between common sense and nonsense was breaking apart. Son Woo-ryang, who spun like a bloody windmill, fell to the floor and convulsed. Looking at the young disciple's state, Chung Myung's voice rang clearly in their ears. "I'm not joking around." Chung Myung spat on the floor and pulled out the wooden sword around his waist. "Get up, you son of a bitch. I'm not finished yet. My anger doesn't die with one hit." Chung Myung was roaring like a lion, but it was far from regal.
Such dirty and petty words.
These were Yoonjung's honest feelings.
What?
Sama Seung's beard trembled.
What is this?
It happened in front of his eyes, but he couldn't understand what had happened. Chung Myung seemed to disappear for a moment and then reappeared in front of his disciple before delivering a blow. The disciple flew into the air, spun around, and then collapsed. That was what Sama Seung saw. The problem was that he seemed to disappear.
Then I missed that kid's movement.
Even though he didn't care about the third-class disciples' battles, did it make sense for an elder to miss the movement of such a young disciple?
No, it can't be.
Sama Seung denied what he saw, but this wasn't his fault. Even if someone other than Sama Seung stood there, they would have reacted the same. Anyone would surely deny a situation that went so far outside the bounds of common sense.
"You cowardly bastard!"
It was then an angry voice came from the side of Sama Seung.
"Making a surprise attack when he was speaking. Mount Hua must not have any shame."
"You wicked bastard!" That was how it seemed to the children. Well, that was to be expected. The higher level the opponent, the more significant it is. For the second-class disciples, it wasn't surprising that they lost sight of Chung Myung's movements for a few moments. But for Sama Seung, it was different. He was an elder of the Jungnam sect. Sama Seung calmed his startled heart and concentrated again.
"Son Woo-ryang, get up! Get up, Woo-ryang!"
The sound of his disciples cheering for Son Woo-ryang could be heard. Sama Seung stared at the fallen child with his eyes still wide in shock.
I must be mistaken.
It had to be. No, it was undoubtedly a mistake.
"Wake up, brat! I didn't even use ki. Don't be such a crybaby."
Chung Myung looked at Son Woo-ryang with blazing eyes. The disciples from the Jungnam sect were cursing him, but Chung Myung made it a point to never listen to barking dogs. The moment one steps onto the center of the arena, the fight begins. Why should he waste his time on courtesy by letting his opponent say whatever they wanted? If he gets sent to war, is he supposed to shake hands with his enemies, share a few drinks, and then start fighting? Son Woo-ryang staggered and got up. Although he was struck suddenly, it was a fist that lacked internal ki, so he wouldn't lose consciousness despite the pain. What if Chung Myung had used internal ki? Death. There was no need to ask. Watching him rise, Chung Myung tapped himself on the shoulder with his wooden sword and observed his enemy. "Get up quickly. Don't waste my time."
"Are you okay?"
Chung Myung's voice, which had sounded annoyed and irritated, quickly softened. Slosh. This was because Son Woo-ryang's nose was a waterfall of blood gushing non-stop. So much blood was flowing that the front of Son Woo-ryang's clothes were dripping wet as a pool of blood collected at his feet. Even Chung Myung flinched at that sight. Son Woo-ryang staggered to stand up and spoke through painful gasps. I can still fight." "But you look like you're going to die." No, it seemed like he was really going to die. Does a broken nose usually bleed that much? It didn't seem like he had been struck with just a fist. Chung Myung would have to punch someone in the face without ki again to test it and find out. Son Woo-ryang supported himself with trembling legs and covered his nose with both hands. The blood isn't stopping. You're going to die, you brat. He would seriously die. No, I'm not afraid of killing people, but it shouldn't be like this. The first murder in Chung Myung's new life was going to be from excessive blood loss after breaking a child's nose with a single punch. What bullshit. Chung Myung, who had such thoughts, looked at Eunam. Shouldn't he get some treatment? It would turn into a murder on Mount Hua. Well, it's the rules. Eunam was so flustered at this unexpected situation that he couldn't even speak properly. In this case, there was no ruling on whether one could return to the battle after receiving treatment. In such situations, maybe he had to ask both sides for their understanding. But was the situation right now really calm enough for him to ask both sides? Slosh. At that moment, Son Woo-ryang tore off the hem of his clothes and started to stuff it into his nose. Oh, smart. The hem of the shirt was stained in blood instantly, but as he continued to stuff his nose, he somehow managed to stop the blood from flowing further. Son Woo-ryang, who managed to control his blood loss, raised his sword at Chung Myung. Oh, is he going to continue? He knew that the Jongnam bastards don't give up easily. Such a unique bunch. Chung Myung felt oddly proud of their tenacious culture. You cowardly bastard! Huh? Chung Myung tilted his head. I'm ashamed! Shame on you! What you did wrong! Just focus on one thing at a time. If you're going to be angry, then be angry. If you're hurt, go get treatment. I'll tear you apart and feed you to the dogs. Chung Myung frowned. For now, he was going to erase the compliments he had given them from his memory. Is cursing at others the only thing you Jongnam disciples learn? Maybe you just lack the wisdom to understand. Are you really saying that? Seriously, don't come out whenever you want, Sai-hung. I'm trying to raise Mount Hua's fame here now, you know? Chung Myung clenched his sword and shook his head. I felt a little sorry for you, but that goodwill is all gone now. Just keep your mouth shut. Even if you kneel and bang your head on the ground to beg, it's late. You son of a bitch, I'll crush you so badly that your parents won't even recognize you. You're going to keep talking. Well, whatever. The last shred of sympathy that he felt vanished. Chung Myung raised his sword and aimed it at Son Woo-ryang. Come, you fucker. Come, I'll show you what it's like to be unable to even touch your enemy. Come, right now. It was then. Son Woo-ryang. A sharp voice burst from behind. Son Woo-ryang turned his head but flinched when he saw Jin Gum-ryung's expression. Don't get excited and remain alert. Don't underestimate your opponent. Son Woo-ryang looked back at Chung Myung. All the second-class disciples had overwhelmed their opponents without being hit even once. But Son Woo-ryang was too excited when he acted. He went up and immediately got humiliated. He grew up hearing lectures about how overexcited people cannot show their true abilities, but he forgot those lessons when he needed them the most. He took a deep breath and regained control of his mind. He felt uncomfortable that he couldn't breathe through his nose, but was able to recompose himself. After getting his breathing under control, his heated gaze seemed to change into a frigid glare as he looked at Chung Myung. I'll send you to hell! Yeah, I'm sure you will. Let's just say that'll happen. I don't really know what I did to his nose either, but he can try whatever he wants. I will show you that the disciples of Mount Hua will never be a match for the Jongnam sect. You should be prepared. Do not expect mercy. Sure. Anything else? If you're done, then hurry up. Show me that I really can't touch you. You won't even be able to touch me. Didn't I already hit you? Doesn't his nose hurt? I'll kill you, you bastard! Son Woo-ryang swung his wooden sword and rushed at Chung Myung. As if he regained his composure, the tip of his sword moved sharply. Surely, Son Woo-ryang deserved his title as the strongest third-class disciple in the Jongnam sect. Dealing with him wouldn't be easy. Even Mount Hua's second-class disciples would suffer at his hands. That's not even to mention the third-class disciples. But it was too bad for Sun Wuriang. He had the worst possible opponent. His enemy was the catastrophe of Mount Hua, Chung Myung. Nope. Chung Myung pulled his wooden sword back and ran at full speed at the opponent.
Huh?
Chung Myung's sword, which was pulled back, swung like lightning as it crashed onto Sun Wuriang's head. Pak! It was unavoidable. How can anyone avoid an invisible sword? Sun Wuriang's mouth fell open as his eyes rolled back.
He's gonna die. He might die.
That child is dead. Sun Wuriang's body crumpled down. However, Chung Myung had no intention of stopping.
Kids, these.
One more hit to the fallen.
Days, don't.
Once more.
Have manners. No manners.
Sun Wuriang's body fell to the floor and Chung Myung constantly hit him.
Even I wasn't like that back in my day.
If the departed up in heaven had heard that lie, they would have thrown something down to catch this liar. Sadly, those in the other world couldn't interfere with those still living.
Fuck it.
Pung! Finally, Chung Myung kicked Sun Wuriang in the crotch and turned away. Sun Wuriang, who soared in the air once again, fell to the floor. Thud. And Chung Myung clicked his tongue. If you didn't curse at me, I would have been gentle with you. But kids these days, no manners. Hearing that, all the third-class disciples decided to never swear in front of Chung Myung. Ah, right. Chung Myung turned back again and approached Sun Wuriang, who was convulsing. He then grabbed the robe that Sun Wuriang used to cover his nose and pulled it out. The blood which had stopped began to flow again.
You couldn't even stop this?
Chung Myung looked at the Jungnam sect side. Neither Sama Seung nor Jin Gum-ryung nor anyone else could shut their wide-open mouths. They simply stared at Chung Myung with shock and astonishment. Surprised? He hadn't even started yet, and they were already this surprised. Chung Myung glanced at them and returned to his side. Looking at his back, Sama Seung said,
"What the hell was that?"
But no one there knew that this was just the beginning, except for Chung Myung. Chapter 100. Hyun-young had a blank expression as he tilted his head.
How did this just happen?
He was Mount Hua's head of finance. Since he was so quick at calculating and sensitive to profit and losses, he has evaluated potential talents whenever they entered the sect. However, the current condition of the sect made it impossible for him to concentrate on his martial arts. Thanks to that, he became the weakest of the elders. Because of this, it was difficult for Hyun-young to understand the scene that just unfolded in front of him. Chung Myung defeated the disciple of the Jungnam sect overwhelmingly. What was going on?
No, sect leader.
Hyun-young, who wanted to listen to the sect leader's explanation, turned his head and flinched. Hyun-jung had an expression that Hyun-young hadn't seen on his face in decades. His eyes were wide open, as if they'd fall out, with his mouth hanging low enough for a bird to fly in. Both Hyun-jung and Hyun-sang were the same.
Should I also be surprised?
He felt a bit upset that he couldn't understand the reactions.
Huh?
Hyun-jung's eyes trembled as a small voice leaked from his throat, as though his soul had been stolen away.
This can't be.
A series of mesmerized murmurs were uttered over and over. Hyun-young gently pulled on his sleeve.
Sect leader, people are watching. Get yourself together.
Hyun-jung quickly shut his mouth. He was so shocked that he couldn't stop his teeth from clattering.
No, that child.
Hyun-jung managed to calm his expression, but he couldn't repress his surging mind. He raised his trembling hand and pointed to Chung Myung.
He shouldn't be like that. This makes no sense. We should have lost.
In the end, Hyun-young got annoyed.
What sort of words is that? After that child fought so valiantly, how could the sect leader say such disgusting things about their own disciple? But this makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Hyun-sang raised his hand and rubbed his face violently. And with his frozen expression, he asked, "How long has that child been in our sect?"
Less than 6 months.
You mean that he beat a disciple of the Jungnam sect after 6 months, and it was completely one-sided as well? Ah, thinking like that made no sense.
Eungum, where's Eungum?
I'm here, sect leader. Unlike the others, Eungum seemed relatively calm.
Before that child entered Mount Hua, did he learn any other martial arts?
No, Chung Myung showed no signs of learning anything before joining.
Then, in just 6 months, he grew this much?
Yes. Hyunjung looked at Eungum in disbelief.
A genius.
Eungum spoke as if it wasn't a huge deal. I'm not sure if genius suits that child. He's a child that doesn't reveal his true self. Even I haven't been able to fully understand his actions.
Huh?
When Hyunjung burst out in admiration, Hyunsang mumbled, I thought geniuses and divine dragons only ever fell into other people's sects. This is like we were searching for a sack of rice in the warehouse, but a golden cow jumped out instead. Hyunjung was shocked.
I thought he was just a bringer of fortune, but...
His mumbling represented the feeling of everyone who was watching. How much has Chung Myung done for Mount Hua already? He didn't need to have any martial arts talent at all. Chung Myung is only human. It wouldn't be appropriate to get greedy and try to force unrealistic expectations onto a child that's done so much for them. But didn't this situation show that he had an outstanding talent as well? Enough to take down a disciple from Jongnam so easily. When everyone was shocked, Hyunjung quickly moved.
Anyway, we got the win. Doesn't this save our face?
Hyunjung and Hyunsang dumbfoundedly turned their heads. Hyunjung grew angry and felt that the elders were acting absurd. Coughing, he spoke and tried to clear the awkward atmosphere.
For now, he saved our face. For now.
Seriously, this is why the finance head should properly learn martial arts. You are the only one who can speak so casually in this absurd situation. Hyunsang joked with Hyunjung, who felt it was an unfair assessment. Hyunjung lightly smiled and looked away towards Chung Myung.
Save our face.
Could he be said so simply?
Perhaps.
The outcome of today's conference may not matter at all. It was possible that Mount Hua had just acquired a talent that could carry the sect for the next 100 years. Mount Hua's child seemed to have won. Looks like it, but...
Wasn't that too one-sided?
Oh, this was quite unexpected. Hwang Moon-yak was relaxed as he enjoyed listening to the reactions around him. I expected as much, of course. Hwang Moon-yak didn't know how strong Chung Myung was. He wasn't even conscious when the Eunha Guild events were settled by that child. He had been told that a single hit from Lee Song-baek was enough for Chung Myung to cough up blood, but he didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. That child was too insidious. He must have been playing the victim to capture the culprit. For Hwang Moon-yak, Chung Myung was an unknown element. However, the reason he could watch and remain relaxed was that there's no way that young brat would underestimate his opponent and entertain a loss. It wasn't like he knew Chung Myung very well, but he was the man whose eyes for appraisal built the Eunha Guild up to its current level. In his eyes, Chung Myung stepped ahead with confidence, which meant he was strong enough to ensure victory. Of course, this was a more radical result than what Hwang Moon-yak expected. Right, this isn't a lost cause. At least that much is clear. Is this conference a battleground for Chung Myung? Then, the results may be different from what everyone expects. There are talents in Mount Hua too.
Considering the age, it's a great display. No, great wouldn't be enough to suffice. The Jongnam Sect's disciples can't be defeated with luck alone, and that was the best of the third-class disciples. Wasn't there a big difference between them too?
To take the lead so confidently, that child was surely an outstanding talent from the Jongnam Sect, but it was completely one-sided. The conversation between the merchants and officials sounded like a melodious song to Hwang Mun-yak. However, Hwang Mun-yak didn't miss these voices' extraordinary heat. It was hard to hear praises for the Jungnam sect anymore, but there was also no one there who hadn't set their sights on Chung Myung. Don't even dream about it. He is the fish I caught. With one hit, Chung Myung managed to get more attention than Jin Gom-ryung. No matter how this conference of sects ended, the name of Chung Myung would now spread throughout Shaanxi. Hwang Mun-yak glanced at Chung Myung, who returned to his seat with a smile.
But they only won once. If all the other disciples lose, then it will just mean that he's the only outstanding one there.
That could be true. Hwang Mun-yak narrowed his eyes and looked at the third-class disciples that welcomed Chung Myung. Now, show me, Chung Myung. Show them all. Indeed, will it end with just one outstanding win? Or will Mount Hua be able to counterattack? Chung Myung sat down with a smug expression as the sunlight fell on him. The burning irritation which colored his expression had vanished, and in its place was a relaxed face that seemed to have no concerns.
How can he be so happy after beating someone up like that? Even the devil wouldn't look so relieved.
Although the disciples had these thoughts, they felt oddly gratified and burst out.
Chung Myung, you did well.
Shouldn't you have stepped on him a bit more?
He must have at least lost 10 years of his life.
Seeing the Sages cheer, Chung Myung smiled. And they call themselves Taoists. They would have decried such actions if they had experienced a similar situation before Chung Myung arrived, such as whether they needed to go so far or how could a disciple of Mount Hua be so vicious. They would have spoken innocent words like that. But now, they had been tainted in Chung Myung's color. They cheered as if they were staging a festival. Even Yoon-jung couldn't help but smile as he spoke. Chung Myung, you did well.
Well, I just had a little fun.
It was a bad thing to say, but at this moment, it seemed justified and made the other disciples feel relieved.
I knew he was strong, but...
They didn't expect Chung Myung to be able to utterly sweep through a disciple of the Jungnam sect. This would be enough to shake their confidence. Mount Hua's disciples felt pity for the Jungnam sect for the first time. Mount Hua was always in a position of receiving pity from others and was never able to sympathize with others. Yoon-jung deeply realized that he could feel pity for all mankind by becoming entangled with Chung Myung.
Chung Myung, great job! That was really amazing!
Even if the relationship with Chung Myung was rather strained, the second-class disciples still flocked towards him and cheered. It wasn't the third-class disciples or the elders, but the second-class disciples who were the happiest with Chung Myung's results. He had helped them repay the disgrace they suffered. The defeat was one thing, but the ridicule and insults that the Jungnam sect had directed towards them were unacceptable. Chung Myung beating his opponent was like a refreshing bucket of cold water pouring down on a blazing summer day. Despite their previous grievances, Chung Myung even began to look a bit cute to these seniors. Personal feelings shouldn't be included, but they were still happy that Chung Myung had managed to regain a bit of Mount Hua's honor after being damaged in the matches so far. So cheeky. If he has such skills, he can act however cheeky he wants. Maybe he's a good child after all. Chung Myung shrugged his shoulders as he received everyone's praises and looked at Yoon-jung. Sahyung! It was a firm voice. Yoon-jung, who guessed its meaning, nodded with a firm expression. It's my turn. Chung Myung accomplished his role. No, he overdid it. Now, Yoon-jung and the others should carry the flame. Determined. Why are you looking so stupidly? Get out there. No, does this bastard have to send someone off like that? Yes. Still, there was something Yoon-jung needed to ask. Do you have any advice? Some tips or knowledge about their martial arts? Would you be able to use it even if you knew? Just get out there. If you can see their face, you can slap it. All right. With bewildered eyes, Yoon-jung walked to the center of the arena. Looking at the eyes around him, his expression changed. The atmosphere definitely changed. Mount Hua didn't have any presence before, But thanks to Chung Myung, the mood changed. There were expectations that the third-class disciples might be different. It was Yunjong's job to turn the audience's expectations into a reality. Phew. He didn't want to be nervous, but he couldn't help it. Maybe it was because he didn't expect so many eyes on him, or because of Chung Myung's performance. But if Yunjong loses, it was then. Sahyung! Chung Myung called him from behind, and Yunjong looked back with a stiff face. Right, any bastard with a conscience would offer some kind of encouragement. If you lose, I'm going to kill you. I forgot for a moment that he's Chung Myung. It was my fault. My fault. Taking a deep breath, Yunjong's stiff face hardened again. He drew his sword, took his stance, and boldly stared at the disciple of the Jongnam sect. Aiming his sword, he spoke. Yunjong, third-class disciple of Mount Hua, asked for an opponent from the Jongnam sect. The winds of change began to blow towards Mount Hua.